Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about vocoders, and I know the title is going to say something like the most underrated tool in psychedelic sound design, but I really think it is. And what I want to do in this video is convince you that maybe sometimes you need to pick up something like a vocoder, play around with it a little bit, look a little bit more in depth into the more complex settings to get some really crazy lead sounds. So without further ado, let's get right into that. And obviously to convince you from this, I want to start off by just giving you an example of the setup that we have here. I'm going to turn off the vocoder, and I'll also turn off this OTT because that's really only on there because of the vocoder. And then we'll just have a listen to the lead sound that we have. Very simple stuff. For those interested in the patch, I'll just quickly open it up. We have a saw wave with a bandpass. This is being modulated by a note on random. And then we have a couple of effects in here, some hyper for some width. We have the classic kind of delay trick where you have the very small delay with a lot of feedback and a little bit of mix like that to get that kind of metallic sound out of it. And then finally the chorus. I've been really loving using a chorus, and I'm actually going to plan on making a video on implementing chorus into lead sounds like this because it's just really powerful for this kind of same stuff. The chorus is what gives it that very crispy high end, because this is a chorus that's actually mostly playing on the high frequencies. Just to quickly demonstrate that, I'll turn it off. You can hear that you get a little bit more of that kind of watery high end from it. And it's just kind of smearing it out, making it a little bit more complex than your standard bandpass synth that you would normally have. But when I turn on the vocoder, this is where the magic happens. And I have to turn on the OTT with it because this is doing a lot of the volume control that is needed to keep the vocoder in check. And you'll hear that immediately with the settings that I've created, we get a very complex kind of glassy sound out of it. So that's very cool. I'll give you another example. If I go in here and turn on this graph, which I've already set up perfectly for this, you'll get a different kind of psychedelic sound, something like this. If I go in here, go back into the graphs again and go to this one, turn on this one, and then I believe this one also needs to be on, you get something like this. Very powerful stuff, and you can see that I can kind of switch between different lead sounds with just one click of a button. The problem is obviously you need to set up these graphs, and they're really hard to understand what they're doing. What I want to talk about today is just kind of the basics of a vocoder, what it is, what you can expect from it, and talk about some of the parameters and stuff like that. So to do that, let's first have a quick listen to some of the other sounds that I have in here, mainly this modulator copy. This is what I'm also sending into the vocoder. So a vocoder actually takes in two signals. It takes a main signal that you want to apply the vocoder to. This signal is called the carrier, and then there's a second signal which is going to be called the modulator. The modulator is going to be modulating the carrier. And the way that works is there's going to be a set amount of frequency bands. Both the modulator as well as the carrier get split up into this set of frequency bands. They're going to be the same frequency bands for both of them. And what happens is they take a look at the volume happening within each band for the modulator and then try to apply that to the carrier. So what that means is that you can almost sonically imprint the texture or the sound of one sound and kind of imprint that on the carrier, right? So you take the modulator, its sonic capabilities, and then imprint it onto the carrier. Now the problem with that is that the number of bands that you're using is very limited. Obviously there's just a limit to the processing that you can do. You cannot have an infinite amount of filters, an infinite amount of crossover filters, but also there's a lot of phasing going on that can really mess with obviously the phase between the harmonics, but just overall the texture of the sound. For example, in the first example, it's what's responsible for that very glassy texture. That's all happening because of a lot of phasing. And we're kind of counteracting that with some of the graphs that we're using and some of the settings that we're using. But you can basically see we get all of these peaks in here, and that's just each individual band playing. Now you might say, well, now I need a very, very complex other tone to play in there. You showed us the synth that was very, very simple, so now I need to go out here and get some kind of other complex tone, because obviously that's what's going on here. Well, not really. As I said, I wanted to play you the tone here, but I got a little bit lost in the explanation. Let's just have a look at what this sound is. It's just one single individual tone. There's not even a modulation happening or a change happening from note to note. And what this really is just a tone that I selected from the tones pack and just kind of played in here. So really, as I said, there's nothing happening in here. This is just this cycle continuously playing at the same key. I believe it's an octave lower. This is at D sharp 0. This is at D sharp 1. Yeah, so it's an octave lower. But other than that, there's nothing like strange or complex about this setup. Now this is the actual modulator used. The reason why I decided to copy it, I can assure you it's the same thing, but the reason why I decided to copy it is because if I solo this, it's going into the sidechain, so I don't think I can actually listen to it. It just plays the whole thing. So now finally, let's have a look at this vocoder. What is it actually doing? What is it giving us in terms of parameters? Well, the most important parameters is what's happening down here in the filters, in my opinion, for this kind of sound design. You can set the amount of bands that you want to use, the resonance for the carrier bands, the resonance for the modulator bands, as well as the order of the filters, the steepness of the filters. I actually recently learned why Melda uses the word order and not steepness. They don't use filters of different steepnesses, but they use the same filter of the same steepness, which I believe is 6 dB per octave, multiple times over. So that means that an order of 4 is 4 6 dB filters following each other up, resulting in a 24 dB per octave filter. The next thing that we have is this format shift, and that is what I'm using to introduce all of the movement in here. Now that we are playing it with the vocoder, you can hear that it has this sweep down and then sweep up effect. And you can see that that's just the formats going down and then back up again. Now, unfortunately, while I was researching for this video, I was trying to find out where this format shift is actually being applied within the signal. I believe it will be applied to the modulator. That seems to make the most sense to me. But it does not say in the manual thing here, it just says that it will be applied. The important thing is that there's this format shift, and what seems to be happening from the looks of it is that wherever it's applied, either if it's applied to the carrier or the modulator, it's being done before the filtering, because with all of these spikes, you can see that the spikes that we just created that result in this very kind of atonal glassy texture that we were just listening to, you can see that they start to move, but it's not like the information itself, it's like actually the spikes. The harmonic content itself does not seem to be moving, right? Like how you would normally see a format shift, it would just move harmonic content more to the high end or more to the low end. That is not what is happening here. It's just moving like where the spikes intersect with the harmonic content that's already there. Now the other parameters that are in here are very important as well, and that's the detector. The detector, because we are like detecting the loudness of one signal and imprinting it on the other, you can apply timing effects to that detection. You can say, well, I don't want very loud spikes of attack or something like that to be transferred over into the new sound that we're modulating on, so into the carrier. And therefore you just have this full detection thing happening over here. You can set attack, you can set release, you can set the hold, and you can set the RMS length, which it uses for detection. Finally, another very, very important parameter is actually to swap the carrier and the modulator. Now, this is very, very useful because it allows you to quickly audition what it would sound like if the effect was kind of like flipped on its head. If you did not have that option, what you would need to do is you would, okay, take this whole thing, take this whole chain, move it away from this synth here, move it onto what you now have as the modulator, and then set up the sidechaining again. That would take a long, long time. So in this case, There's just this one knob that allows you to do this. Now, what I'm not trying to do is I'm not trying to explain this plugin. The settings that we're seeing here and the different parameters that we're seeing here are actually very, very common between plugins. I remember working a lot with Vocoders in FL Studio, image line Vocoders, and that one is even more powerful. In terms of vocoding capabilities, that is a very, very strong kind of vocoder. It has a lot of different features, a lot of different parameters. It also offers a lot of these kind of graphs, even more actually. I believe in Vocoders you're able to change the kind of size per band and the distribution in terms of frequencies in the bands. These are all linearly distributed. So in the frequency spectrum, they're just kind of like linearly stacked, in the sense that if we just open this up, you can expect that they just take this distance of the frequency spectrum and divide it up in however many bands that you have set. So my point of this video is not to talk about MVocoder, it's just vocoding in general, especially when using it in sound design. I think it's underrated, and when I started experimenting with it, it easily kind of showed its full potential, right? You saw the sounds that I was able to make with this. Now, I still want to go back into this plugin and highlight what I think is a very, very cool feature about this particular plugin, which I'm not sure if every vocoder is capable of doing, and that's the matrix. Now, if we look into the matrix, it looks very, very complicated, and at first it was a little bit random, kind of figuring out exactly what this graph is telling me and how I should read it. But just going into the manual and just reading this top part here, band matrix controls how the band affect each other. By default, the graph is a diagonal line from top left to bottom right, which means that the modulator band 1 affects carrier band 1, modulator band 2 affects carrier band 2, etc. So you can just imagine it as this graph is like 1, band 2, band 3, band 4, and then that gets remapped to band 1, band 2, band 3, and band 4. To be honest, I'm not sure whether this is the carrier or this is the modulator, and this is the carrier or this is the modulator, right? They can be either one. If this is obviously the carrier, then this axis is going to be the modulator. But either way, what you can use this graph for is to kind of go away from the traditional functionality. If I want, let's go with a lower band amount just to show. Let's go with 4 bands. Now we get that. Obviously this isn't the greatest. I'm going to turn the resonance down a little bit. Let's turn the order down. What I can do is maybe take this lowest band and remap it here as well, or just like this. Let's see what happens if we, for example, completely invert it. What is happening now, if you think about it, is it's taking this the lowest part of the spectrum of one sound and using that and imprinting it on the higher frequencies of the other sound. So from the modulator, obviously, into the carrier. Now, obviously, there's a lot of cool features in here. I haven't covered the fact that there's also these graphs, which I did quickly show off to give different sounds, but I've never really found out what exactly they're doing. I believe this obviously changes the resonance per band. Instead of having control over the total percentage here, you just have control of it per band. I think you need to read this graph as kind of laid out by the bands and then just the amount of resonance that you want per band. As you can see, in this case, the manual doesn't really tell us everything specific to the individual graph. It just gives us an overview of that. These are the graphs that are used for setting different properties per band. So what I'm assuming is happening is that in our 4-band case, that band 1 is this, band 2 is here, band 3 is here, and then we have band 4 at the end here, and you can just set them for individual bands. So if I want the highest 2 bands to have very strong resonance, I can hold Alt here, set this to the middle, and then just set this to 100% resonance. Now the lowest 2 bands have minus 100% and the highest 2 bands have plus 100%. That's how I believe it works, but obviously I'm still experimenting with this, and I just wanted to share this kind of experimentation because I think it's really cool in terms of the sound design capabilities that you have with this kind of tool. Now I'm actually going to be making a companion video to this. I'm going to also be making a video on FFT morphs, which is going to sound even more complex. I'm going to be filming that video right after I'm filming this one, and it's going to be a very, very similar process. One of the reasons why I'm explaining this one first is because the FFT morph is also going to be a little bit more hard to understand what it's actually doing. Like, personally, I think it's easy to understand the concept of splitting it up almost like multiband crossovers and then just looking at the volume of each crossover and then imprinting that volume onto a new sound. I personally really like doing these kind of videos where I'm not so much showing you, oh, here's a cool synth I've made and this is how you make it. I like those videos too, but this is like an open-ended question for me, and what I would really like to see is just a bunch of people experimenting with this kind of sound design. Maybe see if there's something that I missed within vocoders, if there's like a cool trick that you can do with vocoders to get a very, very unique kind of psychedelic sound, maybe some unique leads or stuff like that. So really my goal with this video is not to show you a patch or to show you a sound, but to show you a technique, and that will be the same for the next video as well. So if you enjoyed this kind of thing, if you think that that's interesting, then let me know by leaving a like. That way I can kind of gauge if this is the kind of content that you guys are looking for, or if you're looking more for just, here's a patch, here's how you make it, now go make the patch and enjoy it for your tracks kind of video. I don't know which one of those kind of videos you guys like to watch more. I do know that I like these videos more in terms to make them, but it's hard to judge what my audience wants, and therefore I'm just kind of leaving it as an open question. That being said, if you want to see more of what I do, if you enjoy what I'm explaining or how I'm explaining it, then make sure that you're subscribed. You can also turn on bell notifications to get notified by YouTube whenever I upload something. But this is going to be it for the video. I hope you enjoyed and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.